Hello, everyone, and welcome to 180 Degrees of Impact. My name is Matt Scott, and today I am joined by Jade Leamcharaskul, or JD Wasabi, as many people know her. Jade, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm really good. Are you doing good? I hope you're doing good.
I am, and I hope anyone who's watching is good. And as I was telling you before, I really love the background setup we have here. I feel like it's like a window into your world because
Mm,
we're literally at your desk.
yep.
But before we get started with this 108 Degrees of Impact interview, uh, or really as we get started, I'd love to know from you, how do you introduce yourself to people? Like if you're at an event, if you're meeting people, what is it
Yeah.
you say about yourself?
So how would I introduce myself? Well, it depends on context. So if I'm at a professional networking event, I will introduce myself as Jade Leamcharaskul. And well done for getting my name right. You know, not many people can handle my surname. It's
Research.
really
That's
good.
what it's all about.
Yeah, no, it's like they just see like a whole bunch of letters and they go like Liam, and then that's it. So well done. Um, yeah. So if I were to introduce myself, Jade Liam Truskell, I write music for games. Um, so yes, I work primarily in the game industry, but you know I've branched out into film and TV as well. If I were to introduce myself in kind of more informal kind of gaming events, I just literally go by my Twitter handle because it's a lot easier to say and it's like quicker to write on like your little name tags.
Right.
So JD Wasabi is my artist name that I write under, basically. Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's exciting. So, you mentioned your artist name, and
Yeah.
I mean, as I've told you before this, I think this is a really exciting and interesting and unique interview for me, at
Mm.
least like to this point with 100 Degrees of Impact, because like all of the work that you're doing with game composition is something that is, well, one, it's familiar. Like I'm sure like in the way that like a movie soundtrack is familiar, in that you're kind of, you hear it and you experience it, but you don't really think about it. But at the same
Yeah.
time, it's completely new to me. So I'm curious, like for you, how did you even get started with like, well, one, the musical and artistic aspect of it, but then how did you get into the gaming and movie soundtrack audio piece?
Sure, sure. So, because I grew up in a quite a typical Asian kind of family, so you know, my parents took me to do all my piano lessons, violin lessons, like swimming class, ballet at some point. They tried to like get me to learn like French and then like Chinese school. So, you know, it's just like you know that kind of like get the kid to try out almost everything and anything, and then push that idea of like, yeah, our kid is like good at everything. Um, but actually, with piano lessons, I was decent. You know, when you're like 8 years old or something, you're like, oh, you know what? It's actually like not too bad. It's not too fun. You know, there's no tantrums at me being like dragged to piano class or anything. So I actually started playing the piano before I started gaming, and I was like, oh yeah, this is quite fun. My family is quite musical. They like my parents appreciate music, so you know it's a really kind of encouraging environment. How I got into gaming, however, was that my late dad he bought me a PlayStation One as a like well done for passing your grade 3 exam. So this was before I entered secondary school when I was about 11 or 12. So it was just before then. So he got me a PlayStation 1 and I discovered the games like mostly Final Fantasy. So my first game was Final Fantasy 7. For people who don't know Final Fantasy, it is like a really long kind of epic story. You know, you have your band of characters traveling to all over the place, and then like lots of stuff happens. And it's one of those games where people will cite it as like, oh yeah, that game is like, you know, really nostalgic. Almost everyone has played it and has got a really good soundtrack. So the first game I played was Seven, but it was only until I started playing Final Fantasy IX where that was the point where I thought, you know what, I'd really like to write music for games because the plot line and all the characters really resonated with me when I was a kid back then. And then I was like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna do this. So that's kind of like where the music and the game kind of combined into my tiny child mind. And ever since then, I focused on like music, but mostly music composition and kind of like computer science, interactive, whatever, different types of media. And then I just carried in through kind of high school, um, or upper sixth form, and then university, and now here. So that's my journey basically.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because it's like a follow up question I have to that
Oh
is,
yeah, sure, sure.
is actually so I'm trying to apply this to, of course, like not just gaming, but in general, there
Mm,
are a lot of careers, and I actually think for a lot of the people who I interview, they're doing really cool things and interesting things, and but at the same time, they're not jobs like, oh, go be a doctor, go be a lawyer, go do these
yeah.
things that are have very like laid out career paths and trajectories. So like, how did you like actually get started making this into something that you do with your life rather than
Mm.
just being a hobby?
So like back then, this is a very long time ago, like just over 10 years ago, when I when I started university. So 10 years ago in 2007, I first started university, and I personally didn't really know much about the game industry, just because like my from all the information that I could gather, like from the school's careers office, from the internet and all that, it just wasn't there just wasn't a clear cut path to working in the game industry anyway, because it's still a very new industry anyway. So even back then, it was like, well, it's not really like, oh, go to university, study about game design, become a game designer. There wasn't that any of that, at least when I researched it. I don't know about it like technically at that time, but anyway, it was just that I couldn't find anything in UK. So yeah, that it's just no clear cut path, and I thought like, oh crap, maybe I just need to move to Japan and just like just like literally throw myself in the deep end. I was like seriously considering that, just because like all the games I was playing is mainly translated from Japanese anyway, and those are the types of games that I was more interested in. They were more narrative driven compared to the games here, which is like it was still like GTA, FIFA.
Yeah.
I don't know, I can't remember the other like UK or Western gamescape at that time, but those sort of games I weren't interested in anyway. So so hence why, okay, maybe I should like literally move. Um, However, luckily, my university, BASPA, they had connections to Codemasters. So Codemasters is an actual UK games development company, and um, they come over to my university to borrow this our sound studio to like make some stuff. I was like, oh, that's cool. So there is a UK game scene. Okay, I don't have to move to Japan and all that. So now it was a lot more easier for me to like start researching through that kind of portal. And then it just like the more I researched there wasn't like a lot of roles, especially for composers, to work in-house in a company here. If you were a sound designer, however, there were a lot more opportunities, but composition not so much. So that's so now that I figured that out, that was when I decided to focus more working freelancing. So I work solo, and that was actually quite daunting, because I'm just like, okay, what's a freelancer? Like, how does that work? Like, oh, I can work at home. Okay, that's cool, but how does that work with like finances, and it's that is like something you don't really hear about when you go through school, you always go through like the careers office and be like, okay, if you want to be a doctor, you need to study, go through all these exams, go to a good university, and then study some more, and then you do like your residentials and blah blah. Like, okay, but freelancing. So ever since then, it was just like, okay, I finished off my university studies, and then I was just like bumbling through life trying to like figure things out. So that's kind of my journey at the moment, basically. Not very exciting, I know, but that's just me.
Well, no, but I think that's that's the good news about it. It's a very real journey of how you approach your work, and it's I think what most people face. I was talking with someone recently about like how there are a lot of people who have like divine intervention that happens,
Yeah.
and then there are also a lot of people who you kind of just it's like, oh, I found that I was interested in it. It probably, I mean, to be honest, because I'm more of the person who's like, oh my god, this thing happened, and this makes sense. But it seems like a
Yeah.
lot more common and a lot more stable to kind of just have a progression that flows into your work where like you're like, oh, how do I do this? Oh, I
Mm.
looked it up. Not, I met someone on a train and they
Yeah.
happened to introduce me to my career. But I think so. As a follow up to what you were just saying,
Mhm.
one thing I was wondering as you were saying that is, uh, what were the challenges that you faced getting started, other than just figuring out how to do it? Because as you were saying, there wasn't a clear
Mhm.
laid out path, especially in university, for instance. But like, what were
Yeah.
some of those challenges that were difficult getting started,
Mm.
or maybe are even difficult now?
So I will start with the first part of the difficulties I had to kind of figure out back then. So back then it was a case of a lot of figuring out with like okay, like what is the best way to start, because this career path is it's so blur, you know, right? So when I was in university, I decided to like I decided to jump in. I was like, okay, I'm gonna make my own game, because if I wait around and like apply to whatever companies, it's gonna take a long time, and I'm a really impatient person. Like once I know what I want, I'm just like, I want to do it now. So I created my own game for my undergrad project, and I thought like, oh, that was really fun. It was so hard because I knew nothing about programming, and I did used to digital paint, so like drawing and creating the visual assets were okay, but the game design and the actual programming and stuff was something like, it was like, okay, wow, I'm making a really simple game. It's like a normal point and click, but I struggled so hard. I didn't sleep for 3 days. I was so worried about missing my deadline. So that kind of step forward was really, really good. Maybe my health didn't appreciate it, but
Yeah.
but that was really good. So when I did my masters, I did the same thing. I was like, okay, right, I know I can do it. So I got some really good close friends of mine to like help me create everything else, and that allowed me to focus on the overall kind of game design narrative, and for me to focus on the audio. Funnily enough, when we were doing this project, it was all submitted fine and everything. I passed. That's the main thing. But it's just like I only spent like 2 days on the audio. The rest of it was trying to make the whole thing work. And that was really eye-opening, because I'm just like, oh wow, maybe this is like how it is in real life. And now that I've been working in this industry for the past like 5-6 years now, it pretty is that, like audio is such a second thought, mostly in games. And like, people come to me asking for like, oh yeah, can you do the audio? Like, we've nearly finished the game. Like, okay, cool. By the way, we want to like launch in like 3 days. I'm like,
Uh,
okay, I can do this. So that was a challenge in terms of like getting used to the whole production scale and like time lengths. So that was back then. Now it's interesting because you Actually, the game audio world is quite saturated. There is a lot of us here. But at the same time, audio is such a second afterthought most of the time. It's changing depending on which developer you're talking to, but that is often the case. And like many others out there, there's no kind of clear-cut way to write game audio or write music specifically for interactive experiences. There's still classical composition, like for film and media, not so much for interactive experiences, just because each project is very, very different. So yeah, it's something that you can't just like go to class, do a course on, and then come out with a certificate saying I know how to do this. It just doesn't work like that. So yeah, that's a creative and technical difficulty now, but it's not. It's something that you can't figure out. So it's doable. It's doable.
Yeah, no, I relate to that a lot because
Yeah.
in my work, I do marketing work.
All right, cool. Yeah.
So everyone's like, okay, I'm going to create this great thing. Like, I meet a lot of people who mention like apps, for instance, or who mention that they like wrote this big report and they're like, okay, get the word out about it. I'm like, oh, like I wish we could take like so many steps back so that we could start planning this from the beginning, instead of thinking of it as like, as you were saying, like, okay, we have 3 days, let's do this afterthought. But it's interesting. It's good that it sounds like that's not something you have to deal with a lot, so that's fortunate.
It happens, but it's okay. It's again, like sometimes like clients can be really good and sometimes clients can be a bit odd, but I'm really lucky in my case that my clients have just been like all awesome so far. So, but I have heard a few horror stories. I'm just going, okay.
Yeah, I feel like with what you do, especially it's because I was listening a lot. And by the way, disclaimer, I do not have a like expert ear or anything. I'm listening like everyone else is listening, who's probably playing the games or like, digesting any sort of content that you're putting out there. And like, I know that part of one thing that you're probably most proud of, it sounds like, is really ensuring that the audio that's being used is representative of different of the, I guess I'll say, of the culture. Well, you specifically say of like Eastern cultures. So specifically, I mean, I know that takes a ton of time, which is why that just came to mind. I'd love to hear more about like that and how you approach ensuring that what you're creating is representative, and why that was something that even came to mind for you in the first
Sure.
place.
The really great thing about working in the game industry is that it allowed me to kind of talk to a whole range of like really awesome and cool people. So there are. Okay, so this is quite difficult for me to explain, but I'll try my best. So in meeting all these like different kind of cool people and like cool groups of people and all that, there's still like a kind of a bad image problem about the game industry in general, right? So people are saying like, oh, computer games, they'll like kind of melt your brain because it's all mush. You're just going around killing people. Basically GTA, Grand Theft Auto, Call of Duty, etc., etc. And I'm like, okay, that's only a very small aspect of the game industry in general. So there's that kind of aspect is a bad image. The other kind of problematic aspects of the industry is that it's still a very male dominated kind of work culture, specifically like white cisgendered straight men, right? So there's that kind of gender imbalance in general. The other aspect of the industry, at least in UK, from what I know of statistically, is that it's still very much white.
Mhm.
So there's not many black developers. There is not many Asian developers or minority ethnic.
Mhm.
Ethnic, yeah. Wait. Ethnic or ethnic? Ethnic. That's the word. I always get too mixed up. So already, like the kind of the type of things we create in the industry is quite it has a narrow view basically. So if there's no diversity in the stuff that we create, and in turn that also kind of feeds back into the work culture as well, because it's the same kind of stories and the same kind of experiences we are developing. So there's that kind of, it's problematic, but it's not something that that can't be changed, for example. So in where I come in, like in meeting all these different people, and I've worked with people working in film and TV and all that, and like it's like pretty much the same as well. It's not very representative of LGBT queer communities as well. There's that aspect into it as well, and just like, but because I'm straight as well, just like, oh yeah, I didn't even think about it. So already I'm kind of part of the problem. So I'm like, okay, I'm like, I want to kind of contribute to this change in the industry. I want to make the industry a little bit better, or at least whatever work that I personally work on, it comes from a place of thoughtfulness. It comes from a place of being open, at least. So that's my core kind of thing that makes me work. And so coming back to your question about like why do I specifically want to focus on like saying like making or basically writing correct East Asian music. So I've been playing like Indonesian gamelan for many years now. I've also been playing Japanese taiko drums for a good few years now,
Mhm.
and I've been kind of researching and studying like Asian modes and compositional techniques of writing music. And it is very different because the context of it is different. There's the Western scale doesn't quite exist. Like already that's like, oh, okay. Like how does a composer approach this if they've only been learning how to write with a Western scale, for example? The context around it, like like Indonesian gamelan, it's used for just about everything: births, marriages, celebrations, funerals, like, for example,
Mhm.
shadow puppetry. And I'm like, okay, cool, like this is my own personal selling point. Yeah, I can specialize in this. So bringing that aspect back into games, all the games that I've played, like set in China or Japan or whatever, for me, it doesn't sound correct. But that's because we are consuming media through like a Hollywood version of what it should sound like, if that makes sense. And I was asked to do like a panel session about this, and this panel session was, what does cultural appropriation sound like in video game music?
Yeah.
So if you're not familiar with this term, it just means that if another culture, usually a Western white centric culture, would take something from another culture, kind of package it up, make it look or sound pretty, and say like, hey, this is a really cool hipster fad or something, and there's no substance to it. It's just like a really stripped down, shiny veneer over what what was the whole core thing around it, basically. Um, I may not have explained that very well, but that's basically something that really resonates with me in terms of like this really makes me annoyed as a composer. And okay, so we've had this kind of panel session, and then yeah, discussing it in that space was really good because it's not so black and white because your audience is expecting something when they've purchased your game product. The composer only has like say like 3 days to write a soundtrack. They don't have the budget to like go off into wherever and study under master so and so, and then like it's not like a game where you just like study for like half an hour with the master in the narrative story and then all of a sudden you are now also a master. you know and
Right.
then on top of it, you have the publishers and saying like, okay, you need to create this game, we're going to market it to abroad somewhere. It needs to be palatable. So again, there's so many kind of angles and constraints that kind of hold you back. So even if you as a composer wants to write culturally correct music, it's just not possible. There's no budget, your audience is not expecting it, and that's not the whole point of game audio and gaming in general. Like, if you are constantly breaking that immersion, and people are playing your game and saying, oh, that sounds weird, that doesn't sound Asian, what the hell, then
Right.
it's like constantly breaking the 4-4 when you're watching a film. It's like, it's weird. So yeah, it's a very much gray area, but it's something that I want to kind of bring to the table to developers before any of the implementation and the production of the game happens, and say like, hey, how about we kind of do it properly right from the beginning and then see what happens, and then maybe your game will sound a bit more interesting, and it will kind of sound out from the rest of whatever. So that's where I come from, basically.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a really long tangent, but I got there in the end.
No, I think it's an important one. I'm glad that you like went through it and discussed the different angles and
Yeah,
and the conversation and cultural appropriation and
yeah,
the underrepresentation of
yeah,
some people say like ethnic people or minorities, or however you would term it, like under. I think the biggest thing I was thinking about as
mm,
you're explaining that is like, what's another good way to reiterate that point. And so I think like for what I'm hearing from you
hmm
is, especially when it comes to cultural appropriation and like the experience with gaming as the example, is like, picture it like you're a white person, or like white cisgender male, like
hmm
straight male, and you are used to like listening to your music and your own culture, and you have this like life that you're immersed in, and then you go into a setting and that's just stripped away. And like, that's kind of what I feel like cultural appropriation does in a lot of ways. Like, it
yeah,
strips away the identities of people who
yes,
aren't in like in the dominant narrative, I'll say. So
yeah,
that's
yeah,
why it's like harmful, because it's like taking away, or that's one reason why it's harmful, I'll say. Again, I'm
yeah,
not an
yeah,
expert, but I mean, from my understanding and experience, it's like stripping away your humanity. And
yeah,
I think in a lot of ways you're helping people, um, just through giving something that's representative, like maintain their humanity and not
yeah,
feel like, okay, here's another thing where it's like, this is my representation. Like, I'll say for me, for example, in movies, it would be like having like the black guy always be the gangster. And it's like,
yeah, yeah, exactly.
no, like, I'm able to be other things. And
Yeah,
like the other piece of that I think is cool is that, like, with the art that you're putting out there, you're really helping you're helping people understand, to my point about the gangster, you're helping people understand that like, they
mm,
don't need to fit into like this narrow definition of
yeah,
like, this is my culture. Because like, I know they're the visuals of a game, and that's a whole other piece, but
yeah,
it's good that you're able to step in and do something to at least like
mm.
make sure that it's better than it is. What I mean, as a follow up to that, and it's probably a really tough question.
Okay, hit me.
Like, what's like your vision for what, like, what would be your ideal state for games in the gaming world when it comes to your work? Because a lot of what you're doing, I feel, is like just correcting something that shouldn't be there, in
Hmm.
my opinion, I guess, in the first place,
Yeah.
frankly. But what's your ideal? And also just as a follow-up to that, so um, are there any games or see, I'm not really a gaming person, else I'd have the word. I was going to say like Dynasty, but that's not the word. But like Final Fantasy is like a series, you know what I mean. Are there any that are really doing it right or pretty right now?
Okay. So your first question
Right.
with like my my personal vision. Okay. So I'm going to tackle that first. So my personal vision is like for me personally, if I can create a commercially successful game with a really good soundtrack, but is culturally correct and people really really like it, that that would like make me really really happy because if if this commercially successful game was like in the spotlight and people can accept it, that's kind of like saying like, oh yeah, it's nice that it's correct. It doesn't sound like a stereotype. Um, it sounds good. That's for me as a creative person and as someone who works in the industry. So yeah, so that's one. Your second question in regards to a game that has done it correctly. I actually haven't played a game that is correct yet, but I think the game industry is like kind of going through a teenage phase at the moment. We've had like a really long kind of age where games are like, oh yeah, let's do all the Call of Duties, and there is a rise of like people tackling really difficult topics. So there is a lot of more games kind of turning the whole gaming culture around in a way that people are creating games about empathy and talking to people, and why is it that we always need to resolve everything in conflict? For example, there is space and it's very very flexible for people to kind of uh, you know look at it in so many different lenses and angles. So that's really really exciting. So yeah, I haven't played a game which has done it correctly, but I okay, a little bit of a story here. So when I was doing this panel about cultural appropriation in video game music, I played Assassin's Creed Chronicles in China. I wanted to play it like just to research. So I bought the game, I played it, and my thoughts about it was really kind of mixed because if I didn't know anything about Asian music, I'd be like, oh yeah, yeah, it sounds like China. And I'm like, okay.
Hmm.
But when I researched into it, it just sounds really pan-Asian. There's nothing like compositional wise that made it sound specifically China, set in the Ming Dynasty and all that. And then I was like thinking, well, the Assassin's Creed kind of games, it's what makes it so kind of cool is that it's quite historically accurate, right? But when I played that particular game, it didn't sound historically accurate to me. So I was just playing it, just going, oh, that what? Really? Um, so I know I'm like the real minority for the player base in playing that type of game. I'm sure everyone else would be like, oh yeah, it's cool. It's a good game. Yeah, I played a game set in China. That's unusual. But for me, it's just like, okay, everything looks Chinese, but it definitely didn't sound Chinese. So okay, fair enough. I looked deeper around it and I found that the composer, well, I haven't spoken to the composer, but just FYI, this is not a composer bashing kind of um, dialogue that we're having here, but it's more like, I'm not really surprised to find a non-Asian person has written the soundtrack. So I'm like, okay, fair enough. But again, it's like there could be a lot of other things, like maybe at that point when the development studio approached that person, they're like, oh, yeah, you are like the best so far to write the soundtrack. I'm like, okay, cool. And on the other hand, like the audience themselves, they're not expecting a culturally accurate soundtrack anyway. So what really is the big problem? It's only me that has a problem, really. So um, I've totally forgotten where I was going with this point. um, oh yeah, yeah. So so in terms of like for me finding what sounds correct, it's really difficult because you just don't know. There are too many there are too many things going into this kind of answer for me to say that is correct, because you can't, like, the development studio is only so big, the composer's knowledge is only so big as well, and how can you like condense like the whole cultural history of whoever into one very very tiny experience? Like it's impossible. So
Yeah.
it's yeah. it's it's very difficult, and it's a very very, very big gray area, so who
Yeah.
knows.
Yeah, it's a massive task, like, or a big question to even ask you to try to condense this like massive thing. And people ask the question all the time to try to
Yeah,
ask you to condense this massive thing into something that is digestible. But I think
yeah,
that just speaks to the complexity of it. Like, it's not like, no, you're not bashing the game composers, but at the same time, you see these areas that could use improvement, and yet
hmm,
there are other areas that are doing it well, but there are also big ways that they can improve, and
yeah.
that is like, that may, I don't know, it's hitting me now, like that might be like the perfect explanation for our society, and like the conflict between people who are like more social justice oriented versus those who are more opposed to that, who are like, why do you want change? And like, well, these, no, don't get it, like, it's fine, like, you're doing this right and it's good, but there are ways that we could be better. And like, it's like funny, and it's like sad, and it's all this things at the same time. But I want to like get into I saw you woke up your computer.
Oh yeah.
There's like, what is on there right now? What am I looking at?
Okay, so like this is kind of like my workspace really, and like all these different lines are tracks,
Mm-hmm.
and each track I've set it to be like a different particular instrument, for example, and like it's like
This is cool. I'm like, I am patiently waiting to like see it, because I'm like, oh gosh, I want to see her like do her with her work in action.
so yeah, so I have my keyboard all set up so I can play at my desktop, and then I can record my whatever I've been playing, and then I can also like kind of edit all these MIDI notes. Yeah. So yeah, so I can like really go deep and like edit really specific tiny details of whatever I've recorded, and and yeah, so there is like this particular program is called Logic, and it's a Mac based, and I really, really like it. There's always this kind of debate about, oh, what is the best program to use, kind of thing. And like, you know what, it really depends. It depends on what you want to do and how you yourself work as well. I like to have a program where, I can do a bit of everything. I don't really want to like focus too much on one element, and I don't want to kind of restrict myself in what I can do, because I'm very much random with how I work. So with this one, it's a piece that I've been working on for a client at the moment. I'm gonna play a part of it because I'm gonna like change most of this anyway.
Okay.
So let me like mute all the bits that I'm planning on keeping.
Oh, I'm so excited. This is exciting.
There you go. It's freaking out a bit. So dear. So this is like a gamelan inspired piece I've been working on, and again, it's creatively challenging just because I am trying to combine like the Western style of composition to the Indonesian style of composition and trying to like make it all fit together and also make it sound okay. So it's a combination of sound design effects, which I can bring up here. I'm so sorry, that's taking ages to load.
Oh no, no problem. This is really amazing. It's like it's cool to see you like actually doing what you're talking about doing. So
No, that's great. Yeah, so basically with this particular piece, I am trying to create something that sounds like something you don't really associate with games, basically. So something that is, at least it sounds culturally accurate. Um, Gamelan in terms of like, you don't really hear gamelan music in its pure form in games, at least I don't think. I've never come across a game where you'd hear it. So yeah, so this is something where I hope that, you know, it will sound culturally accurate. And it's really good because the devs working on this particular game, they want things to at least sound culturally accurate as well. So I'm really excited. It's just like, oh great, you know, we're working towards the same thing, and you know, it might not be 100% correct because as I said before, it's really difficult to do. But you know, I'm hoping this would kind of snowball into like other developers and trying out new things as well and see what we can do if things were culturally accurate right from the beginning. And that part is really exciting for me, basically.
yeah, and it's exciting to hear you explain that. And again, it's exciting to see you in your element working with it. And I appreciate you showing us because it's like at the end of the day, what you're doing is incredible and it's so unique.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm excited to see what you do with it. And I guess I have one final question for you as we kind of wrap up the interview. Like,
Cool.
if your life were a book or documentary, at the end of all of this, I'll say, when you've accomplished your goals, you've had your ideal world, what would the title be and why?
Oh, okay. So what is this, a book or documentary, right?
Right.
Okay. It will be like, no. It will be definite. It will definitely start off with Jade Wasabi, and then the subtitle will be like trying to add add some spicy variety, but in small doses or something like that. You know, like just try it kind of thing. It's the angle of like just trying it. Don't run away from it, but at the same time, like don't completely block it out because it's complicated. The world is complicated, but you know, just try and just try and do good. So that would be my title. It'd just be like just JD Wasabi, and then a really long ass subtitle because even I haven't figured out what my subtitle should be.
Yeah. No, that's what it's all about. No, and it's exciting, and I think people completely understand where it's coming from because of our interview and because they've been able to see your work now. Where do people find out more about you or get in touch with you on the internet?
So the best way to connect with me would be using my Twitter account. My Twitter username is @JDWasabi. That's pretty easy to remember, I hope. And my website is www.wasabi-playground.com. So it's a bit longer there. But yeah, no, I'm very happy for people to get in touch with me and to discuss things or ask me questions. I'm, again, like, for me personally, like, I do want to connect with people, and people asking me questions is is already like a really good sign, because that means, you know, people are thinking about this critically. They want to approach whatever project they're working on in a different way, and you know, that makes me happy that if they want me to be involved with the process to try and make it better, and I'm more than happy to do that. So please do get in touch. I will reply back, don't worry.
No worries, and thanks again for doing this interview. It means a lot. And for anyone who wants to learn more about 108 Degrees of Impact, even though I'm really hoping you know what it is by the end of this interview, because you found the interview. Thank you so much for watching. The website is www.lets.care, and it's at Let's You Care on all social media. And so, again, Jade, it has been awesome talking with you, seeing your art, hearing your vision.
Thank you.
No, thank you. And for anyone who's watching, until next time, keep impacting.